This is the first of 2 episodes in a mini-series. The second will run tomorrow. And in these 2 podcasts, I'll be focusing on the rampant, violent anti-Semitism in Canada that has become the topic of the moment among some. Meaning Americans. Meaning, only when American media takes note of Canadian issues does the world pay attention. That's just the way it is and always has been. But many of those turning their attention to Canada now are missing the real story. It's much more about deeply entrenched institutional anti-Semitism at every level of government and society, and particularly among the elite bureaucrats in Ottawa, who really run the country and set policy. Also, law enforcement in key cities like Toronto and Montreal merit a very, very close look. Harsh scrutiny. This is not some sort of post-October 7th thing, although it certainly has become more intense and overt since then. This is Canada, and what is going on in Canada vis-a-vis Jews will soon become a problem for other communities if it has not done so already. Other communities who have largely kept their heads down and told themselves in that tried and true Canadian way that it's either not so bad or it'll pass. And maybe some are saying the Jews brought it on themselves, let's be honest. But there is a much broader significance that what is going on in Canada is going on in many countries, in particular the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand, all former colonies of Imperial Britannia. Either there's something in the water, which I'm not actually suggesting, I'm not like, you-know-who conspiracy guy, or there is a much more entrenched cultural attitude that is accepted quietly towards Jews. And I believe it is the latter. Latent anti-Semitism that has always been there and is just flourishing now for many reasons. That's what we get into today with Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism, Amichai Chikli, as well as Israel's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sharen Haskell. Tomorrow, in the second part of this mini-series, we speak at length with a third guest. It's time to take off the soft lens rose-colored glasses and look at what's really going on in Canada and elsewhere.
To be very honest, when we're sitting here in the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism and asking ourselves a very simple question, where will be the next disaster, the next potential terror attack? Canada is at the top of the list because we are seeing the same patterns as we saw in Australia.
That is Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism, Amichai Chikli. He spoke with me in March, just days after multiple synagogues in the Toronto area were shot up with gunfire. Yes, I'm producing a lot of content about anti-Semitism in Toronto and Canada lately. Frankly, I've been doing it for the last 2.5 years. But as Minister Chikli says, Canada, it's one of the most dangerous countries in the world in which to be Jewish. Time to pay attention.
When you see what's happening in Canadian campuses, where that is actually being legitimized by many members of the government and by officials and by mayors, when Jewish students are being attacked or when there are demonstrations in front of a place of worship, okay? And you understand the severity of the situation without giving any response to it, you are actually legitimizing and giving legitimacy to violent actions. That's the reality of it. You have to draw a red line. You are the government, you are the authorities, you are the police, you are the forces who are meant to make sure that everybody are being kept safe.
And that is Israeli Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sharen Haskell, also speaking to me in late March about Canada. At the time, there was alarm. 3 Toronto area synagogues were shot up by gunmen in 1 week. There was additional vandalism and violence targeting Jews. Weekly hate marches in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood continued. And Toronto police? Well, they've been cavalier about this tsunami of Jew hate, which has only been encouraged on and under their watch since October 7th. I've covered this phenomenon extensively in previous podcasts, my regular column in Canada's National Post newspaper, as well as on this site, Stig of Tel Aviv. And since late March, the Toronto Police Service has offered some insipid reactions. There's no other word for it. Let's strike up this snake committee. Let's do that report. Nothing meaningful. Absolutely nothing. Jew hatred in Toronto and Canada is normal now. And there is a reason for that. Because political and law enforcement leadership license and embolden such conduct. And they have done so continuously since October 7, 2023. Toronto police? To describe them as being flat-footed and detached would be charitable. Things have gotten to the point where their conduct and professionalism in dealing with overt, violent, chronic anti-Semitism is being questioned openly, and not just in Canada, around the world. And the scrutiny is long overdue. As it happens, a very senior retired Toronto police officer who led the homicide squad in the final years of his service, with great distinction, I might add, he has just launched a book, and it is Fire. Hank Idsinga is his name, and he has been commenting in recent weeks, in media interviews and elsewhere, about the endemic anti-Semitism that is entrenched at the highest levels in the Toronto police force, the 4th largest police force in North America. Tomorrow, we'll be publishing a follow-up podcast episode focusing on just that, the open anti-Semitism in the Toronto police force. And our guest for that show is none other than Hank Idsinga. Today, though, we stick with Israel and the very open concern and criticism of Canadian political and law enforcement leadership at the highest levels of the Israeli government. It's about time. The legendary Canadian politeness that we've long been famous for has been exposed to actually not be there when it comes to Jews. Jews in Canada are fair game. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. In this podcast, we present interviews with 2 senior Israeli government officials, Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Amichai Chikli, and immediately following that, an interview with the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sharen Haskell. Chikli and Haskell have been strong and unflagging supporters of the Jewish diaspora everywhere. But they've also paid attention to the extreme situation in Canada. Canada, of all places. But speaking as a Canadian, I can tell you, I'm not surprised. Not in the least. Okay, now to the first of 2 very candid, interesting, important discussions. Minister of Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism, Amichai Chikli. You are in Jerusalem, and thank you so much for joining State of Tel Aviv this evening.
Thank you, Vivian.
State of Tel Aviv and beyond, I should say. I really appreciate, there's always so much going on here, but especially now, and I really appreciate you not just making the time to speak, but to speak about a matter that really is time critical, time sensitive, and that is the ongoing and increasing violence targeting Jewish Canadians. And this is an issue that you've been very focused on and given a lot of attention to. And I'm going to cut to the chase because on March 6th, which was a Friday night, there were 2 synagogues in Toronto, one right inside Toronto and the other one just north, 2 very large synagogues that were shot at with gunfire. Earlier that same week, another synagogue in Toronto had been shot at with gunfire.
Oh,
And it only took you 4 days. So that was Friday, March 6th. There were shots. No one, thank goodness, was injured. And on March 10th, you wrote a letter to Prime Minister Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, expressing your concerns. Before we get to the letter, tell us, how do you assess the situation for Canadian Jews?
well, so to be very honest, when we're sitting here in the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism and asking ourselves a very simple question: where will be the next disaster, the next potential terror attack? Canada is at the top of the list because we are seeing the same patterns as we saw in Australia. You see the increase, a very spike increase in anti-Semite incidents. This is one. And second, these are not just harassment or graffiti. This is far more violent. We are speaking about setting synagogues on fire. And in Canada, and specifically in Toronto, the number of gunfires that has been shot to synagogues, this is something that we haven't seen in other places in such frequency. And so therefore, 2 months ago, we wrote to the Minister of Interior Security. And since the situation only became worse, I choose to address the Prime Minister himself and telling him, when the disaster will come, you won't be able to say that you didn't had the writing on the wall, that you didn't knew that this is going to come. And unfortunately, in Canada, just like in Australia, we also seen the same pattern of weak, progressive, politically correct leadership that cannot even say the term radical Islam, that cannot even tackle this very important issue. And I think the worst example so far was Albanese. When President Herzog arrived, the community allowed Albanese to approach, to be in the ceremony, and to speak. And when he got on the stage, he basically read the names of the victims and then he left.
No.
Zero coherent message against terror, against radical Islam, about the further steps that they're going to do. The political, I was in Bondi Beach a few days after the terror attack, and the discussion within the government was about gun control. And I was shocked. I said, you really think that gun control is the issue here? And by the way, they have quite strict legislation in regard to gun control. That is the reason why the terrorists, the father and the son, they didn't use automatic rifle. They were using shotgun, which is the last weapon to choose if you want to kill a lot of people. And so gun control, that was the debate.
You raised Australia, and I've done a lot of work on the similarities and dissimilarities between Australia and Canada. And I want to focus on the dissimilarities, which are that the Canadian Jewish community is much larger. It's very concentrated. So the tragedy that took place at Bondi Beach in Sydney on December 14th took place in a city of 50,000 Jews. Toronto, the Toronto area, has between 200 and 250,000 Jews. And the police, and I've been writing about this and speaking about this for 2.5 years, they're simply not protecting the Jewish community, period. There's no other way to describe it. And this has gone on, and then we reach this point where we have, in the span of a few days, 3 synagogue shootings. And I want to read now, Minister Chikli, from the letter that you wrote to Prime Minister Carney. Thank you for doing this. As a Canadian and Israeli, I have a lot of skin in this particular situation. I'm very deeply connected to both places. You wrote on March 10th, and I'm reading an excerpt, of course. You say that you're writing to the Prime Minister, and I quote, following a deeply troubling series of attacks targeting Jewish institutions in Canada. Unfortunately, the developments of recent days demonstrate that the concerns previously raised when you wrote to the Minister of Public Security 2 months earlier, that the concerns previously raised were not theoretical. The warning signs were clear, and the current situation underscores the urgency of addressing the growing threats facing Jewish communities. Escalating threats also necessitate addressing extreme incitement originating from well known ideological sources, including foreign and religious networks. And I just want to conclude with this very strong closing. Such acts represent, referring to the synagogue shootings, of course, such acts represent a serious escalation in threats directed towards Jewish communities and their places of worship. The recurrence of these attacks within such a short time frame raises significant concerns regarding the safety of Jewish life throughout Canada. Closed quote. Have you had any response from Prime Minister Carney or his office?
No, from Carly, not yet. We did get a response from the Ministry of Interior Security, very vague general response. We are looking to see arrests. We are looking to see clear statements from the leadership. We don't see urgency. We don't see real action on the ground. By the way, we're also in contact with the leadership of the Jewish community in Canada that share with us that they feel the same. So I think that it's just not enough. One more thing that we need to emphasize, you spoke about the differences in between Australia and Canada, beside the fact that it's a larger Jewish community. In Canada, you have a large number of Iranians. We're
Yes.
speaking about 800,000 Iranians. Some of them are opposing the regime, and they basically fled the country because of the terror regime in Iran. But many of them are actually identified with the regime, with fanatical Shiite Islam. And we know that elements who are the ecosystem of Iranian Revolutionary Guards operating in Canada. And this is something which also is another source for, let's say, to be worried about. And beside the Iranian Muslim community, you have the Sunni radical Muslim community. I'm not speaking about all the Muslims, okay, but those who are affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. And they are operating through mosques and also through organizations. And unfortunately, we're seeing intense pro Palestine, pro Hamas, pro Iranian activity all across Canada. And this is part of the ecosystem. It won't surprise me that eventually, when they will find out, and I hope they will find out fast, who
Mm.
are those people who are committing these terror attacks and shooting into synagogues. So, one, I'm assuming that it might be the same group. Second, there's a high chance that these group are connected to Iran and to Iran Revolutionary Guard. We don't know it for certain, like we don't have 100% know that that is the case, but this is the mission of the authorities in Canada. And the reason why I'm so concerned is that we don't see that the Canadian government looks at the situation as an emergency. And I think that we are in an emergency. And it's quite surprising because it was a relatively very quiet place, Canada, just like Australia. But sometimes this quiet place brought many immigrants from Muslim countries. And those immigrants not really want to assimilate. And they're bringing with them their radical views, especially regarding Jews. And the outcomes are very clear.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I also am of the view that, and as someone who's very familiar with Canadian society, there is a very deeply entrenched residual anti-Semitism.
Hmm.
So as you say, everyone thought, and Canada's known for being this very peaceful, quiet place, and it was. But there was always this current of anti-Semitism. You just had to scratch the surface and you could see it. And now it has just been emboldened, in my view, in the last 10, 11 years, because you speak about the radical Islamists, but there's also, let us not forget, very strong, powerful cohort of progressives.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything progressive about them. I think they're so far to the left that, at a certain point, far left, far right, the fascists meet, the famous horseshoe. I want to just pick up, though, on a few comments you made that are really important. You spoke about the presence in Canada of Iranian exiles. And it's known that there are hundreds of active IRGC operatives in Canada. Many of them have come with their families. The federal government is kind of quibbling right now over the precise number, and the opposition parties, Melissa Lansman and Pierre Poilievre, say, well, tell us what the number is then. But whatever it is, anything greater than zero is a very serious problem. And we know this to be the case, not just IRGC, as you say, Sunni Muslim Brotherhood. And no one seems to be, as you quite rightly point out, treating this with any urgency. It's just like they're just waiting for something to happen. And I am in Toronto frequently, and I'm shocked. I'm shocked by how it feels. I'm shocked by how afraid people are. I'm concerned to go swimming at the Jewish Community Center when I'm there. I don't feel safe. We're not safe. And that's absolutely correct. And you said that earlier. The government last week, in response, probably in part to the letter that you wrote and other expressions of concern, announced a $10 million grant to the Canadian Jewish community of about 400,000 people. $10 million to enhance security measures around community buildings, synagogues, whatever it is, schools. And I mean, I'll be very blunt about it. I read that and I thought, here, Jews, go take $10 million and buy yourself some bulletproof glass. Now leave us alone. It was so inadequate and so small. I was surprised they even bothered. And it's telling us, just put yourself behind walls. I mean, that's the message I think it sends. What's your thought about that?
Well, so I think first of all, we all saw the terror attack in Michigan, and it is very important to have
You're
a professional security for Jewish institutions. That is for sure. And I think that this is important. It's important that they gave this budget for the security of the Jewish community. But security is half, if not least, of solving the problem, because you need to address the threat. And if you cannot even say radical Islam, then there is no way that you can be relevant to solve the problem, because you need to first admit that this problem exists. And that is what we saw both in Australia and we're seeing it in Canada. It is also quite the same in Britain. In these places where the progressive political movements are aligned with the Muslim votes and they are dependent. The reason why Kani said that the Canadian values are like the Muslim values is because he needs the Muslim vote. Unfortunately, that is the demographic reality. And so they are becoming, and I will take a harsh word, they are becoming slaves of these fanatical, radical Islamists, because they cannot allow themselves to go against it with the full might as needed for the future of the countries. Sometimes, only a disaster opened the eyes of a society. It's if it's not too late. If it's not too late.
I'm not sure.
So
I'm not sure that even a disaster, to be honest, in Canada, I'm not sure that it will open eyes. I really am distressed and concerned about the messages that are being sent. You got to see what's right in front of you.
yeah, and let us not forget that these three governments also award Hamas by recognizing a Palestinian state in the middle of the war, while we still have hostages underground at the end of Hamas. So these governments are unfortunately incapable of fighting this war. In order to fight the war against radical Islam, there's a very high importance of courage, moral courage, and we just don't see it. Unfortunately, we don't see it.
Minister Chikli, I just want to point out two facts that are important and pertinent to raise now, more for the sake of our listeners than you, because I expect you're aware of them. And then I wanted to speak to you about one issue in closing. You mentioned the importance of the synagogue shooting in West Bloomfield, which Absolutely. And it was also, there was a school in that synagogue, very similar to the Jewish day school to which I sent my children. I sit here now, and my kids obviously are older, but I think, wow, how would I feel if my kids were in school in Jewish day school in Toronto today? But more than that, the guards at the American synagogue were armed. The guards in Jewish institutions are not in Canada. So that's the culture, the whole gun culture, as you raised right at the beginning, in both countries is very different. And if that guard at the shul had not been armed, it would have been so much more horrible.
Yeah. By the way, in Australia, they
Yeah,
also had it's not exactly the same, but the security forces of the Jewish community are allowed to carry weapons only when they are physically in the center of the Jewish community. But when they go out, for instance, to an event at Bondi Beach, they're not allowed to carry weapons. So they had security without weapons. Obviously, if they had weapons with them,
yeah,
instead of 12 minutes endless shooting and 15 victims, it could have ended in
yeah,
1 minute and far less casualties. Not to mention what you're saying in regarding to the institutions in Canada. Without weapons, what are the chances that you can stop a terrorist from executing his terror attack?
And within hours of Bondi, I was shocked because there's a weekly march in a Jewish neighborhood in Toronto, and there was a Hanukkah lighting ceremony that I would have taken my kids to. And I was shocked, actually, that the Toronto police allowed the Islamists to demonstrate in the Jewish neighborhood right beside the Hanukkah lighting ceremony, hours after Bondi. Horrible. The last week, in addition, though, to the synagogue shootings, there was also, as you're aware, I think it was on Wednesday night. It's now Sunday. So it was just a few days ago and a few days after the synagogue shootings. The U.S. consulate building in Toronto, downtown Toronto.
Yeah, of course I know. Yeah.
And I mean, this is crazy. This is the
Mhm.
U.S. consulate. And it, based on reports I have read, it took the police an hour and a half to respond at the site after the shooting occurred. I've spoken with a former, very senior management Toronto Police Service for this podcast as well. He was shocked that there appears to have been no information shared with the public regarding ballistics at this point. He said that's really easy and quick to get, and at least reassure the public. Are these separate incidents? Are they the same groups? What do the ballistics tell you? At least let the public feel that you are taking this seriously and doing something. And that here we sit almost 2 weeks later and there's nothing. Again, speaks for itself. You have spoken out. Sharen Haskell, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, has spoken out. Minister Sarr, Minister of Foreign Affairs, had a telephone conversation a week ago with the Canadian Minister, Anita Anand. And there are many people who are saying, you know what, Israel, it's none of your business what's going on in Canada. This is a domestic issue, and we don't really want to hear from you. We don't think that your input is appropriate or relevant. What's your response to those people?
We care about our people in Canada, in Australia, in Latin America. We care about our brothers and sisters who are being attacked solely because they are part of the Jewish people. And I think we really don't care whether it's inconvenient for some people. It's our duty and obligation to do whatever we can. And unfortunately, we are limited because we're not in charge of the law enforcement, police enforcement outside of Israel. But the minimum that we can do is to raise a flag and to say, look, we have learned what happened in Australia. We saw the same patterns, exactly the same patterns, and we know exactly how it's going to end. And we are asking you, if not begging you, to act and to act now. And I think that this is the minimum that we can and must do.
Thank you for speaking up because it matters.
Thank you, Vivian. Toda raba.
As I mentioned earlier, I spoke with Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Israeli government, Sharen Haskell, in late March. Sharen was born in Canada. She's a mother of 3 very young children, and she has deep ties to Canada. We discuss her alarm regarding what is happening and what is not happening in Canada. How law enforcement seems to be simply looking away as violence and incitement and hatred targeting Jewish Canadians continues unchecked, as Sharon notes. Canada may be seen as being a pretty dangerous place for Jews at the moment, but it is not alone. What is happening there is part of a pattern that we are seeing repeat in many countries with sizable Jewish populations. The Canadian experience is important. They're all important. And we have to start to pay attention to the fact that this is happening all over the world. Sharen Haskell, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, you are speaking to the state of Tel Aviv and beyond from Jerusalem. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Vivian, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure.
I've turned to you today, Sharen, to speak to the situation in Canada. We both have very strong Canadian roots. You were born there, I know, and lived there in the early years for some time, and you have very close family in Canada, including your father and I'm sure others. And so you are one of the members of Knesset in Israel who is particularly focused on what's going on in Canada, what you think about what is going on in Toronto, Canada, which is home, the Greater Toronto area, to almost 250,000 Jews.
Yeah, and Vivian, I will start by this, and I hear some of this criticism as if this is a matter for internally in Canada, and it's none of our business. And I think, my dad lives in Canada. My friends, I have relatives and family who lives in Canada. This is a personal issue. And beside that, I'm a representative of the only Jewish state in the world. Part of my job is to make sure that Jewish communities all around the world are safe. I mean, I've spent in the last 2 years so much efforts in trying to warn the Australian government, writing opinion pieces, and in all of my meetings, telling them if they don't draw a red line, this will end in blood. And they said I'm exaggerating and that I'm an extremist, and many other criticized like this. And there it did. People pay the price in blood. And I'm saying that very clearly, Vivian, right now. And I've warned that the same situation in Canada. That was the final warning to the Jewish community in Toronto. The next time blood will be spilled, the Jews are going to play in blood if the Canadian government and the federal police is not going to draw a red line, is going to investigate this in depth as a federal case. Because this is not about Toronto. This is in Montreal. This is in other cities where this is happening all around. Okay? And it is a federal issue. Beside the responsibility I have for Jews and for the Jewish communities around the world to make sure that they live in safety, I'm concerned for my own family, for my own father, who's going in these
So,
neighborhoods, who's going to these synagogues.
Sharen, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, to whom you report, Gidon Saar, he spoke yesterday, I believe, with Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Anita Anand, and he posted on X, Twitter, that he had suggested to Minister Anand that she perhaps focus on the security of Jews in Canada in a way that clearly has not happened to date. But Canada is a country of immigrants, and we have people from all over the world. And we have a very large Chinese, for example, population. We have a very large Russian population. Those populations have not been targeted, domestically. You said that you had many conversations over the years with your peers in Australia.
So we didn't have the exact similar conversation, and it has been a little bit difficult. I think that the conversation yesterday that our foreign minister had was very important in reiterating our great concern and the lack of action of the government, and to address that more than our relationship, you know, it is extremely important for us that the Jewish community is safe in Canada. In many cases, if the Hamas pro-terrorist rhetoric continues on, when you see what's happening in Canadian campuses, where that is actually being legitimized by many members of the government and by officials and by mayors, when Jewish students are being attacked, or when there are demonstrations in front of a place of worship, okay? And you understand the severity of the situation without giving any response to it, you are actually legitimizing and giving legitimacy to violent actions. That's the reality of it. You have to draw a red line. You are the government, you are the authorities, you are the police, you are the forces who are meant to make sure that everybody are being kept safe.
That's absolutely right. And I mean, I want to add to that something that I say incessantly, but it can't be said too frequently. At every level of government in Canada, municipal, provincial, and federal, the authorities, leadership have said, you know, these are just peaceful protesters and they're exercising their constitutional rights to freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. Sharen, that we also have, it's said to be over 700 active IRGC members that have taken refuge in Canada with their families. And I'd expect that Israel might take an interest in that as well. Is this an issue that has been raised between the two countries? Why
And
not
look, I'll say this. I think that in Canada, there should have been a serious red flag waving quite a long time ago. I think most of the authority, and especially the intelligence community in Canada, knows about the operations of Hezbollah. In Canada, 700 agents of the IRGC who are fleeing from Iran to Canada when they are scared for their lives. This is a serious, serious red flag that should be waving, especially from the internet, from the in intelligence community, and especially the armed Canadian forces. It show you the depth of some of the operations or people, leadership that is actually operating in North America as well. This is radical Islamists who are thriving in that country. So this is like a ticking bomb. It is only a matter of time. And you see that now. And you were talking a lot about the double standard, and I want to emphasize that. Can you try and, I don't know, imagine massive marches in the streets of Toronto calling for the death of Chinese, okay? Calling for an armed attack on the Chinese people in Canada? I mean, this is, breaking the law. This is a call for murder. This is a call for violence. This is a serious racist crime. But when it comes to the Jews, when they go off and chant to globalize the intifada, which means exactly that, bring the violence, the death, and the destruction into Canada on the Jewish community. Bring it from the Middle East and globalize it. Bring it to Canada. Attack the Jewish community in Canada. That's what it means. And yet they completely ignore it, just go through. That would not pass on any minority. And so, we speak about anti-Semitism, and this is a mental disease. It is a mental disease. And unfortunately, it is being let to spread in Canada. And it goes through all the departments. It even reached the education department,
Oh, it's
with different reforms that were done in schools, how you're allowed or not allowed to talk about Israel and about Jews, and what's happening in universities and in the media and social media and in the streets and in parliament as well.
Jewish children are being brutalized, beaten up in schools, in the public school system in Toronto. I know of many cases. I have raised this repeatedly and publicly for 2.5 years. It's horrifying. The enrollment for JK children in Jewish day school in Toronto is just gone through the roof for the next school year. People are afraid to send their children to public school.
Mhm.
And I mean, that kind of tells you everything you need to know. But it is in every part of life. I have a daughter there who works in the healthcare system and in one of the best hospitals in the country. And I hear horrific stories every day about what's going on.
Was.
It's everywhere. People are afraid. This has been allowed, back to your point about red lines. This has been not only permitted, it has been emboldened by every level of government. So when people are out in the streets calling for the annihilation of Israel and murder of Jews, that is a clear incitement to violence and hatred.
Vivian, we live in a time where, the progressive movement, and especially in Canada with the inclusion and everything, we live in times where in schools, in the medical system, in governments, where any individual, whether it is a woman, an LGBTQ, indigenous, a minority, Chinese, Indian, African, whatever it is, will only say the word, "I'm uncomfortable with this," the world stop. Everything change and everybody go into this hysteria. Oh, they feel uncomfortable and they have these security rooms and discussions and whatever. And then the Jews come. They don't say, "I don't feel uncomfortable." They say, "I am violently attacked. There's racism and hatred and hate speech and call for violence towards me, and no one does anything." And when you live with a government that refuse not just to act or even to acknowledge there's a serious problem, you're not going to find solutions because there's laws in place, there's enforcements in place, they can be prosecuted, but no
Yeah.
one is doing their work.
I want to talk and close out, perhaps going back to the conversation that Minister Saar, the foreign minister of Israel, had yesterday with Canada's foreign affairs minister, Anita Anand, in which he said, I assume something like, red lines have been crossed. It's time to do something to protect the Jewish people living in Canada. What, if any, thoughts Minister Anand shared? Are you able to tell us what transpired in that conversation?
We won't share, private conversations, and this is very important. But I can tell you that, at least for us, we are beyond words, okay? Far beyond words. Words are not enough. Words are not gonna fix things, okay? We expect the Canadian government to tell what actions they are going to take in place in order to make sure that the Jewish community is safe.
As one Jewish Canadian with very deep roots, and I'm there often, and I have so many friends and family, and my ties are, deep. Thank you for paying attention and for raising this with the top levels of the Canadian government, because Canadian Jews have been kind of thrown to the wolves by their own government, in my view.
Yeah, and I maybe I'll use this also just to say we might be the smallest people and minority in the world, but we are the biggest family. And our heart here in Israel goes to the Jewish community in Canada, knowing what they're going through, and just to tell them that we will do everything in our capability to try and push the government to make sure that they're safe.
And that means a lot. I want to, when I was appointed, right before I was leaving to take up my position, we had a family friend, and she was an elderly at that point in her late 80s, survivor from Krakow, Poland. She spent the war years as a beautiful teenage girl hidden underground. Her mother was in Auschwitz, and she came over to congratulate me, and she was crying. She said to me, "The work that you are going to do is the most important work, because if Israel had existed then, it would not have happened." And I think that we have to remember that we are as Jewish people and as this small minority, we're never too far from that knife edge. We're never too far from an existential crisis.
Yeah,
And it was a very moving moment, and it ties into what you just said, which is we are one big family. And thank goodness that we have the state of Israel strong and ready to protect Jews everywhere. Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you very much, Vivian.
Since Sharen and I spoke, there has been a spate of anti-Semitic attacks everywhere in Canada, in the US, in the UK, in Australia. Jews are being told to conduct themselves with extreme caution. What that really means is hide. Hide the fact that you are Jewish. Hide the fact that you are Israeli. Don't speak Hebrew in public. Hide the fact, or you could be killed, because Jews are being hunted today. In synagogues in Europe, Canada, the United States, and Australia, at community centers, in neighborhoods, in schools. That is the reality of the moment. It has been the reality in many places since October 7th, and it will not improve spontaneously. After this podcast was put to bed, like totally done in the can, Toronto police announced, on Wednesday, May 6th, in fact, that an arrest had been made. A male was arrested in connection with the, quote, March shootings at synagogues in Toronto and Vaughan, closed quote. This arrest apparently relates to 2 of the 3 synagogue shootings. The individual charged was a minor at the time of the alleged crimes and therefore is not identified. He has been charged with 7 offenses, all of which focus on property and weapons-related crimes. Nothing to do with hate. Sources advise me that the investigation is still very much ongoing, which is also confirmed in the police press release. Interesting that the crime is being handled by the Integrated Gun and Gang Task Force and not the Hate Crimes Unit. The Toronto Police press statement is included in the show notes to this podcast. As always, we appreciate you being here. If you do not do so already, please consider supporting our work with either a paid subscription at stateoftelaviv.com or make a contribution to Buy Me a Coffee. Just go to our website and click on the appropriate prompt, and it's all easy from there. We're independent and we are committed to this work, and we need your support to keep the lights on. Thanks again for being here. Until next time, stay safe. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to vivian@stateoftelaviv.com. That's VIVIAN @stateoftelaviv.com. And if you go to our website, stateoftelaviv.com, you can find the subscribe button and take it from there. Hope that you do that. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything. Thank you, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team, and thank you, listeners, for being here. Until next time, stay safe.